Hello and welcome to the introduction of Oikopolis 3, The Rise of the Cooperative, an undergraduate studio conducted at the Faculty of Architecture, CEPT University. Before I get into the details of the studio itself, let me briefly explain the structure of the BR program at CEPT. The first year is known as the Common Foundation program. Students of the second and third year get clubbed together into studios called Level 2 studios. Students of the fourth and fifth year program get clubbed together in L3 studios or Level 3 studios. The Common Foundation program is one large studio with around 260 students, whereas in both the Level 2 and Level 3 studios we offer a choice of about 12 to 13 studios, which means that every studio has about 10 to 12 students. The studio that I am conducting is a level 3 studio and has 11 students in it. Now, in order to contextualize the level 3, I should briefly explain level 2. The way I look at it, level 2 studios focus on one or the other aspect of design. It could be related to context, it could be related to design process, or the final quality or the quality of the final building as a product. However, what binds all the level 2 studios together is that I would term them as learning the art of design, meaning whereby that students are learning how to design unencumbered by pressures of the real world. If that is L2, what is L3? To begin with, let me say that the way I look at it, L3 is not about more complex projects, it's not about newer methods of designing, nor is it about large projects. Then what is it? I would like to term level 3 as the practice of designing. And to borrow a term from Jeremy Till in Architecture Depends, where he says that architecture is a contingent profession, that the architect is never able to do exactly what she wants because pressures of things like building regulations, client and client demands, or issues of economics and costs do impinge on design decisions, and this is what this studio touches upon. So in this context, now let me get into the explanation of the studio itself. As the term oikopolis suggests, it's borrowed from the Greek idea of the oikos and polis, where the oikos stands for the dwelling or the homestead and the polis stands for the city. And this studio is a discussion or tries to engage in a dialogue of what is this relationship between the home and the city. This particular iteration of Oikopolis is termed the rise of the cooperative because we are specifically looking at redevelopment projects in Ahmedabad and we are calling it the rise of the new cooperative. Now when we look at urban housing in the city, these are the kind of images that we see: banal, monotonous, repetitive units. And on the other hand, architects love to talk about housing projects like these, Moshe Safdie's Habitat 67, or more recently OMA and Ole Sheeran's Interlace at Singapore. Now interestingly, even in architectural education we see these two extremities. There are some colleges which focus very heavily on the rational and pragmatic aspects of housing, so they end up doing projects like they are on the left, and there are schools which focus on the exploratory, utopian and imaginative aspects of housing, and they tend to produce projects like the one on the right. Our studio is positioned between the two extremes. In this studio we firmly believe that on one hand we cannot deny the reality of building regulations, developer driven profitability concerns and user and client demands. However, we still believe that this does not necessarily mean that we need to end up designing banal, monotonous, repetitive buildings. So how did we do this? In order to explain this, let me explain the structure of the studio. Our main project in the studio, or the culminating project in the studio, is a 28-day long project. I would like to stress on this fact because typically in senior years the project is introduced beforehand, or at least is known beforehand. In our case, the students were not even aware of the site or the context of the final project before it was announced. However, the rest of the studio or the rest of the semester has been a preparation to address this 28-day long project. Of the preparations we did a series of one-day time problems. The intention of the time problem was to force decisive thinking, the whole idea that you need to take a decision, knowing fully well that if you had more time, you'd probably dwell on it slightly more. Then there were a series of book readings and a seminar that the students presented. The purpose of these two exercises was to give a theoretical and a historical underpinning to urban housing. We also did an exercise called Memories of the Self and Collective to stress the fact that even though we might be dealing with mass housing, we cannot forget the fact that for people it's their individual homes and that they spend their lives here and they develop memories in this project. This was parallel to this, we were looking at aspects of regulations, aspects of profitability, and this whole question of what do you do with user preferences if you don't know the end user. As you can notice, the entire preparatory part of the studio was not a linear process. At any given time, we were juggling with at least 3 or 4, 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 exercises at one point in time. The whole idea being that one also learns to be outside an exercise while doing the exercise. Let me now go into the details of each of these exercises by just showing you one sample of the exercises. Let me begin with time problem. This is the kind of brief that would be given to the students. This one is more detailed because it's a redevelopment project. The example I'm showing you is the time problem 6. So typically I would just give the location of the site, the permissible FSI, that's it. In this case, because it was a redevelopment project, I had also given the unit plan of the existing house. This is typically what a student would produce. Again, remember, this is the last time problem, so by this time students have gotten a hang of it. So a ground floor plan, maybe a typical floor plan, some overall idea of massing, a few views, diagrams explaining how the units are organized, unit plans. In this case, I think the student was exploring multiple 8 or 10 different types of unit, some interior views of what the actual experience of the space will be like. And yes, this was a common thing that we asked everyone to do. On the left you see an exhaustive checklist. I'll come to that later. But also that at every 2 hours in the 24-hour time problem, they had to record what they were doing at this point in time. We use this to do a sort of a post-mortem of a time problem and also to compare time problems of different students in order to understand how we are designing and where we are spending more time. Now, students were able to achieve this because we also did something called preparation for the time problem. There were many different types of preparation. Again, I'm not going into details of all of it. You can have a look at it in the website. But things like parking, for example, studies of parking, understanding both from a regulatory perspective and an anthropometric perspective, questions of lift, landing areas, free of FSI areas, garbage disposal in Ahmedabad and size requirement for garbage disposal, to even things like trees, species of trees, depth of their roots, what trees can you plant if you just have 1 meter of soil because you have a basement, and so on. So all of this were done before the time problem, so that during the time problem you didn't have to spend too much time thinking about it. Let me now go into the next exercise, which was selected book readings. We picked up Housing and Dwelling Perspectives on Modern Domestic Architecture by Barbara Miller Lane. I selected this book because it gives a very good cross section, or as the title itself suggests, various perspectives on modern domestic architecture. The way we conducted this exercise was there are about 35 odd chapters in the book. Each student was assigned 3 to 4 chapters, and we had discussions in class. Also, the students produce these kind of frames for each of the chapters, so we have one frame for each chapter. The idea of producing this frame was not so much to do a summary of the book, but also bring in your own examples or your own thoughts that you might have come across while reading that chapter. So for example, some were more visual, some were more diagrammatic in nature. So there is this kind of a frame. I use the frame because we were using Miro board. So if you look into the details of it, you can find, for example, that people are putting in newspaper clippings or aspects of Mumbai which are not originally part of the book. So it was a more active reading and responsive reading or critical reading kind of exercise. This is just like a screenshot of almost all the frames that you can see. Now by the third, fourth week, students also started choosing one topic related to housing, on which they presented a 10-minute seminar presentation which was discussed during the seminar. Again, I am not going into the details of the seminar or the discussion, but the topics varied from questions of flexibility and affordance, or the idea of community and living together, questions of need and greed, questions of meaning as to what is a home, and questions of expectations and reality of aspirations of people. So we have a YouTube website where we have all the seminar discussions. You can have a look at it if required. Then we did this exercise called Memories of the Self and Collective. Now this took us in a very different trajectory. What we did was we divided the studio into 3 groups: the wanderers, the wanderers, and the dreamers. And it was just a collaborative drawing exercise where on Miro board we were just drawing the various memories that one associates with housing. It could also be sounds, it could be smells, like the sounds you can hear in the background, because I'm recording this from my bedroom sitting next to my window. And then you could also bring in whatever you wanted. You could bring in photographs, book readings, you could bring in videos. And again, this is available in more detail in the studio. Though what this exercise did was it brought out various dimensions of life as it is lived in housing, so that we don't forget this when we are designing mass housing. Then when it came to regulations, economics, and user preferences, we did have multiple sessions where we tried to find out how developers calculate, what are their costs. We also looked at the whole idea of Jantri and Jantri rates. So for many students, this was their first exposure to this dimension that affects architecture. We also looked at the GDCR and the NBC, and we built on, or we used the last year's Oikopolis students booklet that they had made, the visual GDCR, where they had converted the GDCR into diagram format, and also restructured it based on at what stage of design is it required. So that was that exercise. Now finally, when we come to Shanti Apartment redevelopment, Shanti Apartment lies in the northern part of Ahmedabad. The space, the plot hatched yellow, is what is Shanti Apartment. To the south of it is the 132 feet ring road, which is one of the major arteries which cuts across all the radial roads in Ahmedabad. It has a BRTS corridor on it. What you see immediately on the north side of the side, a relatively empty plot with buildings on both sides is what in the 50s and 60s was envisaged as the green corridor or the green belt for Ahmedabad. However, now we increasingly see housing construction happening in this belt as well. Immediately to the east of Shanti Apartments is Vardhan Towers, which is a 10-story structure. The rest of the apartments surrounding the site are all walk-up apartments. They are either G+2 or G+3. Going into detail of the Shanti Apartment site, the site itself is just shy of 1 hectare. It's 9,814 square meters. It has roads on 3 sides, with the major 18-meter road being on the south side of the plot. We were also lucky to have access to the original drawings from the conveyance deed of the apartment. So this shows the site plan. This shows the unit plan. So it was also interesting to see these kind of official documents of the house, which also talked about the provisions that were there in the house. The houses themselves are small. They are just 1 BHK, as we would call it today. Although on site, if we look at the surroundings or the project, we see that people have made a lot of additions to the housing. In some places the original housing is almost not readable, but it's a very residential neighborhood with lot of like I said, G+2 apartments. The 10-story tower that you see at the back is the Vardhan Tower. So this was a brief introduction to the studio. You could go to the studio website at oikopolis.net and look at the third iteration, which is the rise of the cooperative.